Which players are the dark horses to make the Red Sox opening day roster?
You are Locked On Red Sox, your daily Boston Red Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I want to welcome you back into the Locked On Red Sox podcast. Thank you so much for making Locked On Red Sox your first listen of every single day. I'm your host, Jake Ignaszewski, and here, as always, with my co-host, NESN's Lauren Willand, and starting to look more into what the Red Sox opening day roster will look like at the end of March. Obviously, we're all into the overanalyzing of each and every single game, each and every single hit or pitch that's happening right now in the Red Sox spring training games. But one thing that I really noticed last year was Cutter Crawford found a way to sneak right into the Red Sox 26-man roster. And that just brought up in my head, who could do the same this year?
Yeah, there's a lot of good options. And, Alex Cora, as he said, he's taking the 26 best players. So besides, the Rafael Devers, the Alex Verdugos, Kike Hernandez, you wonder, looking at the roster, who could slide in there, who could maybe knock someone out. And this is going beyond, the Jarren Durants, the Bobby Delbecks, and looking more toward, the Brandon Walters, maybe even the Cutter Crawfords. So it's an exciting time for baseball. And like you said, we love overanalyzing things. We still have a month to go before opening day hits, which is crazy. Like we're in March now. So just the end of this month, we'll be watching regular season baseball. And this roster may look a lot different than people are projecting right now. But that's the fun part of this offseason or spring training, because now we get lineup projections, we're getting roster predictions, and kind of who will be like the X factor of this team. It's just such a fun time. And it's nice to see warm weather on the TV, because it's snowing right now and it's cold, and I'm like, baseball just brings me like life. Like, it just makes me think spring is here. So let's get these dark horses underway, because it's a fun time in baseball.
I agree. The hot weather's been nice to see down in Florida. I'm excited to go down to Fort Myers in a day or so. But it was a little bit funny too to see Jared Garabas, sort of joking with Tom Caron on the NESN broadcast. I don't know how you stand down here in this heat. He's like, I'm sweating, a ton. And TC obviously joked about the bucket hat and everything like that. But one thing that I saw going into today is Ian Brown actually spoke about this in a recent MLB.com article. Each sort of writer for MLB looked at a dark horse for their specific team, and Brown ended up pointing out infielder and outfielder David Hamilton, who most may know him from the trade coming over from the Brewers, which sent Hunter Renfroe over to Milwaukee. And Hamilton stole 70 bases last year, and he's most well known for the speed that he was able to showcase last season. Ultimately ended up breaking the franchise record for the Portland Sea Dogs in terms of bags swiped, and also led the minor leagues last season. But Brown sort of looked at Hamilton as an option to make the major league roster due to Mondesi missing, the first part of the season.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, because we knew Mondesi may not be ready for opening day. We knew that the Red Sox got him for depth, and now he may not be ready because the ACL tear and trying to recover from that. But David Hamilton makes a lot of sense, and I think he almost makes too much sense to make this roster, because you mentioned all the accolades from last year, and you mentioned what he can bring this team, and we've said this about a lot of people, but this could be a big spring training for him to show, hey, I'm capable of making this major league roster. I'm capable of contributing to this team. And also, hey, I'm going to be one of those trade pieces that actually works out and makes this trade look a little bit better in the eyes of Red Sox fans.
No, yeah, exactly. And, another thing that Brown also brought up was that Hamilton, with the bigger bases, could be more of a commodity for the Red Sox, and with those bigger bases could have the ability to steal even more bags at the major league level. But the one thing that I think about is how much in realistic this is to actually happening. And you brought up that there's a good chance that it might happen, but that's why we bring up the dark horse. That's the ultimate word that we're looking at throughout this episode. But the only reason I say that is because Hamilton only played in Portland last season. And, when we look at another player like Enmanuel Valdez or some of the other options at middle infield, they had more experience at AAA. You could even bring Ryan Fitzgerald into this equation as well. But, the reason I think, Hamilton was mainly looked at, he's on the 40-man roster. Valdez is as well. Now, Fitzy isn't. But, when you also look at what Hamilton was able to do outside of the stolen bases, was able to do very well offensively, 251 batting average, 12 home runs, 42 RBIs, and does also bring that versatility of being able to play infield and the outfield as well.
Yeah, that was going to be my point. The versatility that he brings to this team too is very crucial, especially in the beginning of this season. You have a lot of players not necessarily playing out of place, but playing in positions maybe they're not used to playing full time. Like Kike Hernandez, but clearly he's going to be fine at shortstop. I don't think there's really much concern there. But even Christian Arroyo, the second base, that's a big thing right there. Right. You don't really know, is Christian Arroyo going to be able to handle full-time duties? I hope so. I think that he's shown flashes of being able to be a stable second baseman, but you just never know. And even though Hamilton doesn't have major league experience, I think coming into a Red Sox team that they have tons of experience and there's a lot of newcomers, this might be a great time for him to just mesh with this team and kind of show them what he has. I would love to see him kind of showcase that for a major league team, obviously the Red Sox. So I would love to see him on this roster. I think he'd be a good fit. I think that you mentioned the bigger bags as well. Maybe he could be a stealing machine like he has been before.
And, there's not a lot of guys that really jumps off this depth chart that really is able to use their speed to their advantage like Hamilton is. Bobby Delbeck might be, the fastest guy on this team right now. Who knows? But, you also brought up the Kike Hernandez, his ability to obviously play very well at shortstop. We saw his Sports Center play a few days ago, sort of Derek Jeter-esque, in my opinion. And so, yeah, he definitely doesn't have an issue playing shortstop. I think, these middle infield options are going to be pieces that Alex Cora in the front office look at as a possibility to slot in as a depth piece or to, be able to replace Mondesi on the opening day roster. But, the other thing as well is that I think that they got to put into that thought process, which I bet they are, is, the development of the player. You don't want to call up a guy like Hamilton or another guy like Fitzgerald or Valdez too quickly when they might not be fully ready. And so I'm curious to, hear some of your picks as well on who could be the dark horse.
Yeah, I'll do my more obvious first one before I do my second one. Jorge Alfaro, we've talked about him a little bit on this show. He is a catcher, but he does have versatility. He's going to play first base. He can DH. He can I'm not going to say he can do it all because that's not the case, but he can do a lot. And I think with the uncertainty surrounding the catcher position, even though Alex Cora has said that he'd be fine going into the season with Wong and Reese McGuire, I think that Alfaro kind of provides a friendly competition among this team and a chance to prove himself too. I mean, he is coming in with, I don't want to say with nothing to lose, but with everything to gain. And I think that he could be a fun addition to this team. We've seen, his energy. He's got really good energy. He brings, I feel like, a really good, charisma to this team. So I think he could be a dark horse, whether that's a catcher or whether that's, I don't think it's be first base. I think, first base is pretty situated, but maybe he's going to be the catcher. Maybe Connor Wong goes to AAA. A lot can happen in this spring training. And yes, he will be at the World Baseball Classic, but there'll be times there to show off that versatility and he can come back to the spring training and maybe kind of translate that right over. Obviously, without the pitch clock and the other MLB rules, maybe that will be a bit more difficult for him to kind of get into a groove. But I am looking at him as a dark horse to make this roster. Like I said, I think he's just a lot of fun. I think brings good vibes to this team. And after last year, you just can't have enough of that. And if he's going to prove that he can be not even an everyday catcher, but, a platoon catcher and call a good game and earn that trust of his pitchers, put him on the roster.
Right. And, the other aspect as well that I was thinking about, regarding Alfaro is just the 40-man aspect of it. He's not on that 40-man roster right now. And obviously we've seen a lot of interesting moves from the Red Sox, maneuvering around different players from that 40 man. And, there's some players that most Red Sox fans believe, shouldn't be on that list more than others. But, looking at it right now, the Red Sox have Mondesi as an active player. He has not been placed on the IL. And so that could be a perfect way to be able to allow Alfaro to easily be added to the 40 man roster. But then there's the whole aspect of it as well is, once you take Mondesi off the IL, then what are you going to do to be able to keep Alfaro on the 40 man? So it's just an interesting thing to think about, just that added aspect. But I completely agree with you. He's somebody who we've spoken about with the energy that he's able to bring to the clubhouse, and especially now with more of the focus on sort of the defense and also him working with Veritek as well to be able to improve that specific defense and have that be a little bit more of a focus rather than what he's able to do with his specific bat, which we've also seen has flashes of being able to do damage against major league pitching, but also at the same time struggles with being able to get on base consistently, have the plate discipline to draw walks and everything like that. But I think, we've spoken about it a ton. I think that the catching position specifically is one that isn't talked about nearly enough. It is still one of the biggest question marks going into the Red Sox opening day.
Yeah, it is. And I think that it makes, like I said, it makes for kind of a fun, friendly competition because Christian Vasquez has been the catcher for this team for a while. He's kind of been the guy. And we always knew what we were going to get from him, right? Like there was never this huge expectation for him to be this dominant offensive catcher, but he knew, he had the trust of his pitchers. And even, Kevin Plawecki, no, he wasn't the greatest out there, but he had the trust. And you look at, someone like Brian Bayo, who has Nate Eovaldi and Chris Sale have raved about him. So you think that just like the trust that pitchers have, that catchers have with one another, and how it's important to just give what you can. Because I mean, you look at this, you think Connor Wong and Reese McGuire are going to be the 1-2s, but Alfaro can come in and take that 2 position. He could take that 1 position. I don't think that's going to happen. I think Reese McGuire for the most part is a lock. I don't want to guarantee that, but catchers are very, very important to this team. I'll go back to Sandy Leon, who Rick Porcello loved throwing to. Chris Sale loved throwing to him. So when you have that kind of connection, maybe they get that connection with Alfaro, maybe they get that connection with Wong or McGuire more than the other 2. So it's the catching position is so interesting because I think this is the first time that this isn't, a Christian Vasquez caught team in a while that Red Sox fans have been used to. So he's definitely one. And then my not so obvious, not that he's obvious, but not my next choice is Audinaire Mosqueda. He pitched the first spring training game for the Red Sox, I believe it was. And I think he's maybe like the dark horse to make this team. He spent last season with AA Portland. He had a 4.30 ERA, 45 relief appearances. He had 76 strikeouts over 58 and 2/3 innings. And the Athletics' Chad Jennings, friend of our pod, Chad Jennings, also pegged him as a dark horse. So he's somebody that I think is really interesting, and I think that fans should keep their eyes on him because, I mean, like I've said, Alex Cora has made it clear. It's the 26 best guys coming out of spring training. It's that. So if he can make an impression, yes, he's spent last year in AA, so that would be a big jump, but he's a lefty. He's been kind of singled out by the Red Sox, and I think he could really help this team, and he could be almost like that X factor that has a really big season, that breakout player, not so much the X factor, but the breakout player and that dark horse. I think every team needs one, so let's go with him.
And Jen McCaffrey, who we had on last episode, also mentioned him as a dark horse as well. And she also, one good point that I like, she said, is that, even though he's a non-roster, invitee, so is John Schreiber. And, Schreiber's a great person to point out who, wasn't looked at as one of the top, pitching arms in the system or the guys to watch to make an impact on the major league roster going into last year, but he was ultimately one of the most effective bullpen arms that the Red Sox had down the stretch. And so, I think, he's a great dark horse that you chose. And, I think, at times we overanalyze sort of the AA only making up to that level. And, we have seen Heimblum at times put more emphasis on wanting guys to go through AAA to be able to get developed going into the majors, but also it's not out of the realm of possibility. We've seen it before to where guys will just get called right up from Portland. We saw it with Andrew Benintendi in the past, and we've seen it with so many other prospects in the past. So, he ended up looking good against Northeastern, obviously not against professional players, but at the same time, he still looked good.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, yes, Northeastern is a college team, but you still have to get your reps in somewhere. And it's better than him getting lit up for 8 runs. And you take what you can get. And it'd be fun to see him just kind of come into this Red Sox team, make a name for himself. Hell, even if he goes to Worcester and kind of makes a name for himself there and just gets himself on Red Sox fans' radar, because I don't think many people are really talking about him or kind of seeing what he's about. He's only 23, so there's plenty of time for him to kind of grow. But I like the idea of, I love an underdog story. And I love just kind of those bold predictions where I'm like, this guy's going to make the team. Bold predictions oftentimes don't come true in my case because I go very out there. But I think this one is realistic that he could make it. I'm not saying he will. I'm just saying it's a possibility that he could make this team. And it's probably a bigger possibility than 50%.
Yeah, completely agree. Another guy who, I'm going to talk about my list in our second segment, but, we brought up Fitzy earlier on. He's somebody who a lot of people thought was going to make the opening day roster last season. Ultimately didn't end up happening. But, if he has another strong spring, who knows? It's not out of the realm of possibility. As you mentioned, for Fitzy too, I think it's more than 50% that he could make the opening day roster, at least in my mind. But I'm going to speak more about some of my picks who are dark horses in our second segment. And then, later on as well, we're going to speak about and look at some of your picks that you mentioned on Twitter. But before we get into our second segment, I just want to talk to you about FanDuel. So the midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because new customers get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance to win at a bigger payout with same game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Now, looking at some of my picks that I had for the dark horses to make the opening day roster, sort of how my mindset of looking at some of these guys were players who were on the 40-man roster, players who didn't have the name Bobby Delbeck, Jaron Duran, Zach Kelly, Caleb Ort, and, sort of people like you mentioned, the underdogs that maybe some people aren't fully thinking about, but these names have been in a lot of Red Sox fans' minds over the last few days with how they performed in spring training. Starting off with Enmanuel Valdez. He's somebody that we've spoken about throughout this offseason as a potential possibility to sneak onto the opening day roster, not only with his ability to play second base, shortstop, and also third, also has the versatility to play outfield, not his strong suit. And I think overall, a lot of people would assess that his defense probably isn't his strong suit, but Alex Cora did give him a lot of praise, which we spoke about earlier this past week, that he can hit. He's somebody who has great plate discipline and really showed off his hitting tool last season during 2022 with a batting average of 296, 28 home runs, 107 RBIs with a 918 OPS over his performances with 3 separate teams. But when he came over to the Red Sox in the Christian Vasquez trade and ended up playing with Worcester, didn't really get off to the best foot, ended up having an average of 237, 7 home runs, and 30 RBIs, and actually struck out more than he actually got hits, ended up getting 41 total hits over 48 strikeouts. But Valdez is somebody who a lot of fans have been really excited about and also have been clamoring to have him be a potential possibility to slot into that second base position. But I'm very curious if, it's the aspect like we've talked about with a lot of these guys. Are you rushing him to the majors before he's ready? And should he have more time in AAA?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be a big thing too that they need to think about with a lot of these kind of dark horse candidates. And people who maybe they need to fill in roles. But Valdez has so far impressed in spring. And we've talked about, you can have the best spring training of your life. If it doesn't translate to regular season games, it does not matter. But we did see some flashes of what he can bring last year, and we've seen a lot of it in spring training. Alex Cora seems to be very impressed by him, which I always think is an optimistic kind of attitude. But at the same time, I don't think he's going to say he sucks. But he's also not afraid to say he needs to improve, right, or that he knows what he's looking for when he's looking for people to shape up this roster. So I'm intrigued to see how the rest of the spring training goes for him. And we've talked about second base. That is a question mark. Yes, it's Christian Arroyo's position, but we know that his injury history, he has not been a full-time player. Maybe you get him somebody who can, platoon with him and get them major league reps. But we've also talked about too, and I'm right there with you, don't put them in Major League Baseball if they are not 100% ready or as close to it as possible. We saw it last year, what can happen.
Yeah.
So if he needs to go to Worcester and get those reps and to be a solid contributor for this team, do it that way. But if he continues to have this kind of spring training, it's going to be hard for Alex Cora to keep him off this roster.
Right. And you brought it up with sort of players being forced into roles when they aren't ready. We saw it with Brian Bayo starting off, Josh Winkowski as well. Sort of obviously injuries forced them to have to fill in. Hopefully that's not the same as that thing when we're speaking about Mondesi or, a guy like Garrett Whitlock or Brian Bayo if they're not ready for opening day. And so, that's one thing that they're going to have to mull over when trying to make those decisions. But, if Valdez is looked at as, the best 26 of the overall group, I would love to see what he's able to do in a sample size with Boston. But, at the same time, how much is it really going to help him if you have him, play, a month or so and then just bring him right back down to Worcester? Who knows? Could help him understand the competitiveness of the majors, but also, you want to give him consistent up at bats in AAA to overall, help him develop. But, another player who I think needs a little bit more development in AAA, but, really caught a lot of Red Sox fans' attention on Sunday was Brandon Walter. He's a guy who, is looked at as one of the top pitching prospects in this Red Sox farm system. Also a friend of the pod as well. But, he also, spoke about his recovery from his neck strain in an interview that we had with him earlier in the offseason. But that's one aspect to look at is he was limited to only 2 starts in Worcester, didn't really go how, we would really like to see, especially with how dominant he was in AA overall over his time in AAA and AA, pitched 57.2 innings with a 3.59 ERA, 76 strikeouts, and here's the kicker, 7 walks. You heard that right. 7. It's pretty crazy the amount of control that Walter has, and it's also cool to see sort of how fans are comparing him to Chris Sale with his sort of delivery of his sidearm and also with how his sweeping pitches look with maybe some fans hadn't seen him in AA or AAA, but he's definitely a guy to watch out for. And so he also has the ability to come in as a starter, also has experience within the bullpen. So very curious to see if maybe his limited experience in AAA hinders him from being able to get that call up.
Listen, if his slider can look how it did 2 days ago or 3 days ago, oh man, his slider was filthy. And it looked like he just put in so much work in the off season. And you mentioned his control. I think his control is it's unreal. Like 7 walks. He does have a lot of control over his pitches. It's just a matter of getting MLB ready, getting the reps, strengthening yourself and getting yourself to that level. But I do see him as a dark horse as well. I mean, the bullpen, you look at it, it looks, like it has a good thing going. It does look much better than last year. But again, if Brandon Walter is one of these 26 best players, Alex Cora is not going to leave him off the roster. Or maybe he sends him to Worcester and says, player A has a short leash. She'll be up here in May. May. So I liked what I saw. Again, it's early, but I liked what I saw. And I think first impressions, especially in spring training, are important. And I can't say enough about that slider. If you have not seen it, just go type in Brandon Walter slider on Twitter. He has so much confidence. He looked very confident on the mound too, which I think was impressive, especially after how last season ended for him. So I'm really excited to see the rest of spring training for him and see kind of what this future holds for him in Boston.
And on Sunday, when he impressed, only 7 pitches, struck out 2 batters. If you
The
need any
control, it's
more,
crazy.
yeah, if you need any more of an example of his control, that just says it right there. And I think as well, if I were to pick 2 guys that I would feel comfortable replacing Mondesi and Whitlock, with them being sidelined to potentially start opening day, Walter and Valdez are those 2 guys in my mind, at least right now. But we'll see how they continue to perform throughout spring training. Another guy who ended up pitching on Sunday and impressed and has been in a lot of people's minds in terms of somebody who could make an impact going into this season is Chris Murphy. I remember he was somebody that Alex Cora spoke about last season as a potential dark horse to make the opening day roster. But Murphy struggled a little bit last year between AAA and AA, a total of 152 innings with an ERA of 4.03, 149 strikeouts, and 72 walks. Now, it's interesting because he split right down the middle of his time in Portland and in Worcester. Pitched in 15 games in Portland, 15 in Worcester, and made 13 starts in Portland with a 2.58 ERA. But then, we really started to see him struggle in AAA with a 5.50 ERA. So curious to see sort of what, similar to what I said with Walter, if, they want to see more time with him in AAA. But, he looked good so far from what we've seen in spring training.
Yeah, I think we can say this a lot about our dark horse candidates, is that so far from what we've seen, they've all looked pretty good. So that's, again, that's a very good sign. And I think that Chris Murphy, you look at him and he does have a lot of potential. And we've talked potential for days on this podcast, but I think he's still a very good dark horse candidate. I think that he's maybe the least likely of the 3 or 4 that we've talked about to make the roster. But I think, again, much like anyone else, just reps and continuing to build your strength and just kind of figuring out, get control and command of your pitches. And I think he'll be well on his way. But I think that's a very bold dark horse candidate, but that's what makes these guys fun to talk about. It's what makes them dark horse candidates. So I think that the rest of spring training will be big for him. And I hope that he can kind of find his stride. But I think he begins the season in Worcester.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, I think as well, from what we saw on Sunday, is just a perfect representation of how much pitching depth the Red Sox have, and good pitching depth, not only in terms of, AAA, but also AA as well. And oh my God, that rotation in Worcester and also bullpen as well. It could be MLB caliber. And, we even saw it too. 2 guys like AJ Politi and Thad Ward. Think about if you added those guys and didn't to those rosters and didn't end up losing them in the Rule 5 draft. We could see Thad Ward ultimately, he's going to make the Nationals roster, for the most likely, or then, he has to get returned. And then same with AJ Politi as well. But I think that just continues to showcase the depth that the Red Sox have of pitching, and they haven't had that in a while. And, another guy as well that I wanted to bring up who could slot into that a potential bullpen role is Wyatt Mills. The Red Sox ended up trading for him from the Royals earlier this offseason. Last year with the Royals, struggled a little bit with a 4.60 ERA over 27 games, but we saw him have a relatively good outing on Saturday. 1 walk, 2 strikeouts. But one thing I did want to mention with all 3 guys of Walter, Murphy, and Mills, it seems like the Red Sox love sort of this sidearm sort of pitching approach, and we've seen it obviously. Tanner Houck has semi of a similar arm angle. Obviously Chris Sale, that's what he's most well known for, but John Schreiber's another guy as well. Maybe they're starting to notice that some of these semi sidearm sort of pitchers are the way to go.
Yeah, a sidearm just scares the crap out of me, because when I played softball, I played softball, so I did the windmill pitch, but when I threw sidearmed, and my coach tried like hell to get me to stop throwing like that. And I didn't play professionally. I played 1 year in college, so it didn't mess up anything, and my arm was already jacked up by the time I started actually like pitching well. But the sidearm just always, I'm like, I don't know if arms should bend like that. You see the pictures sometimes of Chris Sale, just like his arm is I can't even do it. Like it's all the way back. And to me, I'm like, that just screams Tommy John surgery at some point. But it is a very interesting delivery just because it's a sidearm throw. You look at it because when you learn to pitch, you're overhand tossing. You're not kind of side arming, and it's always been intriguing to me. But it's also always like, oh my god, please don't throw your arm off. Please don't tear your UCL right here. But another very interesting case. I think that he does have a possibility, but much like Wyatt Mills, no, not he is Wyatt Mills, much like Chris Murphy. I think he begins the season in the minors, but I think that he has the chance here to impress Alex Cora and the rest of the Red Sox and to kind of keep himself on their radar and fans' radars as well.
Right. And, we had some fans semi agree with us, but also bring up some other players that we didn't mention. And, I brought it up before, Duran's somebody that I didn't mention since he's already had plenty of opportunities to showcase his skills on the major league roster and wouldn't really consider it in my mind as a dark horse. But we had New York Patriot. He said Duran. Same with Super Dave. He also said Jaron Duran as well. And one thing that I did want to point out that we haven't spoken about in terms of Duran thus far is it's been interesting to see his different stance. And obviously, everybody's overanalyzing spring training, but he's looked all right. Hit a double, hit a home run, in 2 days ago. So very curious to see how he continues to showcase his offensive ability with this different stance.
Yeah, I mean, he looks good through the first couple games here in spring training, and again, it's something that he needs to continue to carry through the rest of spring and into the regular season if he does make this roster. So I definitely think he could be a dark horse, but because he's been up and down on this roster before, but I think because of how last season ended and his attitude and not hustling for the ball and then getting into it with Kansas City fans. So I do think that he's got a ton to prove coming into this offseason. It's nice to see the stance readjustment. It's funny how baseball, sometimes you just need to move your hands up or down the bat. You need to fix your stance a little bit, but it's all in the mechanics. And if he can get that and get his attitude straightened out, he could be a good addition to this team, a good contributor to this team. We know he has the speed. We don't have to discuss that. We know the speed is there, but now it's just a matter of, is the rest of it there? And so far in spring training, it looks like it has. But is he going to be like Bobby Dahlbeck and be the best spring training player we've ever seen in our lives? Or is he going to be a serviceable MLB player? I think this is the year we might find out that what Jaron Duran is.
I hope so. Excited to get some of the clarity on that. And, also looking at, another guy that we've already spoken about, but we had 3 separate people agree on this consensus. We had Sammy James, Moss Chops, and also
Moss Chops, my man.
It's Jeff Passan, but with one F.
Yep.
They all said David Hamilton. And so they're all in agreement with Ian Brown. Very curious to see. Hamilton's another guy. Obviously, we spoke about it at the start of the show, but I want to see him, get more at bats throughout spring training. He'll definitely have those opportunities as well. Obviously, like a guy like Dalbec and Valdez with, players like Jaron Duran, Kike Hernandez not being in the lineup to the WBC. So curious to see how that ultimately correlates to if some of these dark horses are able to sneak their way on the 26-man roster. But that concludes this debate of which those players have the possibility to be able to do that. And we're going to continue to look at some of these fun storylines, continue to overanalyze the different things that are coming out of spring training 5 days a week. So if you have not yet, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Red Sox on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We want to thank you so much, as always, for making Locked On Red Sox your first listen of every single day. Now make your second listen and check out Locked On Fantasy Baseball. Win your league by listening to Matt and Dom every day as they bring you the best fantasy draft strategies. Find Locked On Fantasy Baseball wherever you get your podcasts on YouTube. And I don't know about you, I'm trying to win my fantasy baseball league, so I'm definitely going to be tuning into that.
Oh yeah, they know their stuff
this season. They definitely do. And also make sure to check out some of the other Locked On podcasts as well. Not only Major League Baseball, NHL, NBA, all the different leagues to be able to stay updated with everything going on with some of your favorite teams. Also, if you want to continue to stay updated with the Red Sox outside of following just this podcast, you can follow the podcast Twitter. It's LO_Red Sox. And if you're thinking, how do I get involved in some of these fan responses or Twitter responses? Well, you got to follow us over on Twitter. Something that we like to do before each and every single episode is whether we have a guest or we're talking about a topic like this. we sort of pose the question and we use your responses in the episode to be able to, help get other opinions out there within the episode. So make sure to follow us over there. Also follow myself on Twitter. It's at Jake Iggy. And also Lauren is la 3 laws, Lauren with 4 R's. What's up, Roxy? And we'll end this episode how we always end it. Keep the faith and let's go Sox. Peace.